And so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I had a whole day set aside for this. We probably don't need a whole day. And since we lost Monday because of the weather, this time it was actually one of the things. We're going to talk about the history of exercise science, sort of exercise physiology in some ways as a field. Okay. We are a very young field in comparison to other things like biology or chemistry or philosophy or English or something like that. Okay. But I'm going to walk you guys through all of this. And so, did anybody prepare beforehand? Anybody ready for your quiz on Monday? Who knows? Okay. Who can tell me the very first sort of real exercise physiology lab? Where was it? Like, what school was it at? Harvard. Harvard. And in what department was it in? Yeah, it was in the business school. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of the origins of anatomy and physiology and the Greeks and those things. But I always have to start with this. The first kind of real formal educational things and research things in exercise physiology were at Harvard, because of course they were. And it was in the business college. Okay. And whereas you guys may have come into all of this by thinking about sports and rehabilitating injuries or treating injuries, or how do I train to get bigger muscles, or how do I train to run farther or faster, something like that. The initial folks at Harvard did not care about those things. I mean, some of them probably did. You know what they cared about? They cared about how can we put you in a factory and get you to be more productive workers without you basically killing over. As you guys will see, right? You all are aware of something called OSHA. You may know what OSHA is. It's like the Occupational Safety and Something Administration, right? There are child labor laws. There are things that say, like, you can't do this. Your working environment has to be safe, blah, blah, blah. OSHA is a more recent development. What they cared about in the 20s was, okay, great. You have this factory. We don't know what, there's no air conditioning. There's no fans. There's all these different things. Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes it's cold. How can we get you to be more productive workers? Okay. The man trying to exploit y'all, right? Forever. So that was where it all came from. And that's why we will talk a little bit about, you see these guys here in their suits, which is hilarious, and like their giant coats. That's why they started studying the effects of altitude and heat and cold on the body and on people doing work tasks and those kinds of things, which basically that's what exercise is, work. Okay. So we'll circle back around to that in a minute. Okay. Well, maybe it will advance forward. Okay. So the origins of exercise physiology really are rooted in kind of traditional biological sciences like anatomy, right? Anatomy is structure, bones, muscles, nerves, okay? Structure. Or physiology is function, okay? Function. We will talk, obviously, because the class is about exercise physiology, we will talk a huge amount about function and how physiological systems interact with each other, how they respond to stress and exercise in this course. Okay, but these two things together, which I don't want to give you guys like PTSD about Dr. Ketchum's class, right? Or about anatomy or anything else. For those of you that took it here, we know some of y'all took it like online at OTRIP or someplace. We know how this goes in those ways. It's a lot. It's a lot of information. It can be a difficult thing. What we get with exercise physiology really is, if we apply movement or work, as you will see, muscular work as a stressor to the body. So stand up, wave your hands, squat, run, jump, whatever it is. What happens? How do your physiological systems respond? How does body function respond and change? Okay. So in a very kind of informal way, okay, thousands of years ago, because the Greeks started everything, this is really sort of the origins of exercise physiology. It was probably back with the gladiators. Okay. And so you can think about, there was this guy who was a physician to the gladiator. His name was Galen. And as far as we know, at least in the textbooks that I can read, this guy seems to be the first person to have done a lot of kind of in-depth theories about anatomy and physiology, right? Kind of early things looking at form and function and muscles and how the body moves, right? And then obviously dissecting cadavers, okay? So then if you know your history, which all of you should, right? In the midst of this, we kind of had a period, there were the dark ages, we can talk about stuff, and there were all kinds of plagues and things. And then as we're getting near sort of towards the Renaissance, then there's going to be some early actual textbooks, right? People drawing, people talking about, we've named this muscle, this bone, these nerves, those kinds of things. Mostly though, early anatomy things were descriptive. We did a lot of anatomy, not a lot of physiology, because how do you study physiology if you can't see inside a body? How do you study physiology if you can't measure heart rate or stroke volume or muscular force or nerve conduction or brain function, right? We didn't have a lot of technology to be able to do all of that in the 1500s. Okay, so in many ways, the very first true textbook, okay, on exercise physiology was probably published in about 1890. Okay, and many of the early studies, which I find to be hilarious, focused on muscle metabolism. Okay, energy use in your muscles while they're contracting. Guess what? We spend an inordinate amount of time researching in 2024: muscle metabolism. Okay, we're still doing a lot of the same things that we were, almost 130 years ago or thereabouts. Okay. So a thing that will be very important for our things that we talk about in class was a gentleman named John Haldane. Okay. He developed early ways to measure oxygen use during exercise. Okay. If I want to study muscle metabolism, one of the easiest ways to understand what is happening is to measure oxygen. Okay. Muscles use oxygen and glucose or fat or protein or some other carbon-based thing that they go through glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. And then at the end of the electron transport chain, we use oxygen and we make energy. Okay. So if we can measure oxygen use, we can very accurately estimate how much energy your body is using at that one moment. And if we get it at rest, and then we say, hey, get up and run around, measure oxygen use, then we can figure out how much extra energy are you using. Okay. We will talk a lot about this. We still do this today. You guys will do this in exercise physiology lab or in testing and prescription. We still use many of the same things. As a grad student, I had to use a piece of equipment that this guy designed. It's called a Haldane analyzer for oxygen. It was built in the 1950s. This old dinosaur piece of equipment at the University of Georgia. And in one of our grad classes on metabolism, we had to see how they did it in the olden days. And then we got to use a more modern kind of way to analyze oxygen. So we would appreciate, in many ways, the sort of ease with which we can do things. This gentleman here, A.V. Hill, okay, was the first Nobel Prize winner on something that looks like exercise physiology. He studied muscle metabolism in animals. Okay, he was a pioneer, did the first study of runners. We're not going to do it in this class, but there are things called the Hill equations, try to estimate energy use in muscles and those kinds of things. And much of the stuff that he learned or that he discovered in the sort of early 1900s, we've proven to be, they were 100% accurate. We can't do anything any better than what he was doing then. Okay, so it's pretty wild. Really kind of important sorts of things there. Okay. Now, as we said, a lot of the stuff that began to look like modern exercise physiology, or at least in the department, began at Harvard. Okay, in this thing called the Harvard Fatigue Lab that was begun in the Harvard Business School. So, are you guys aware? You may not, you may be too young. So when I was in like college and these sorts of things, there was sort of a silly game, if you like pop culture, called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon is an actor, and you could basically go from Kevin Bacon being in a movie or a TV show within like 6 sort of connections to literally anyone else like on Earth, because he'd been in so many different things. Okay, so like he was in this movie with so-and-so, and then that person was in another movie with so-and-so, who was in a movie with this person, and we've gotten down and now I've linked Kevin Bacon to Jennifer Aniston or whatever. Okay, my 90s references are very dated. Okay, so we can do the same thing. I said, and I told you guys at the very start, exercise physiology is a very young field. Okay, it's really only been around about 100 years. Okay, every one of you now, okay, if you consider yourself to be a student taught by me, okay, we'll sort of, you're in the class, we'll see how well I'm doing from a teaching perspective, could probably within about 3 or 4 steps link yourself back to one of the original people that was in the Harvard Fatigue Lab. Okay, so my department chair at the University of Georgia, his father didn't exactly work in the Harvard Fatigue Lab, but his father was trained by someone who was in the Harvard, who was an original member of the Harvard Fatigue Lab. And then our department chair went to school, and his dad taught him, and then he taught me. And so within like 3 steps, we're back to the Harvard Fatigue Lab. But you can do this for pretty much anyone. Pick a different faculty member on our campus or in our department, and you can link ourselves back because we're so young. Okay, and so that's why I think it's important to at least have some level of understanding of what were they doing, why were they important, because they completely shaped sort of what exercise physiology looks like today. Okay, they cared about the physiology of movement and the effects of environmental stress, hot, cold, altitude. Okay, but it was about work. Okay, any of you guys that have ever like had a job where you had to do manual labor in any way, shape, or form? Okay, work is exercise, or exercise is work. They are basically synonymous. You're walking around, right? If you've ever had to wait tables or do any of those things, you're up, you're on your feet, you're moving, you're walking. That's physical activity, it's exercise, it's work. And so they cared about the effects of environmental stress on that to try to figure out what do we need to do about working conditions to maximize work productivity. Okay, and so between 1927 and basically the end of World War II, they published about 350 articles out of the lab, which is wildly productive, sort of at that particular time. Okay, and so then after World War II, the lab broke up. And everybody that was in the lab sort of went back to their home country or back to where they were originally from, got a job at a different university, and then essentially made their own Harvard Fatigue Lab at the new place. And that is how we began to sort of grow out as a thing. Here you can see some pictures, right? It always kills me, right? It's the 20s, and the guys are wearing like 3-piece suits and bow ties and things. You will note, right, there are no women, okay? Ladies, as a field, sort of in general, we have not always been the kindest towards you guys in those ways. We'll talk more about why we wouldn't let you guys run a marathon or anything more than 5,000 meters until the 80s. Really, it's kind of like the mid-70s, because we were afraid your uterus would fall out. I'm not kidding. That's like a real thing. Okay, we thought that distance running would basically prevent women from having children because we assumed that was like the end all be all of everything. So there's some interesting sociological things, but they're here, right? Just think about what we do now. We go to lab, and I'm not wearing a 3-piece suit or those things. They're outside, so they're breathing into those things. And so they are collecting inspired and expired air. And they run that air through the Haldane analyzer. And we know there's a certain amount of oxygen in the air here. We collect what you breathe out. We see how much the oxygen has gone down. We see how much the CO2 has gone up. And we can then back calculate from all of that roughly how much energy we think you've made using oxygen to generate CO2. Okay. Same technology today. We're just better at it. They would collect the air in these giant balloons. They're called Douglas bags. Okay. I've had to breathe into a Douglas bag. It's wild, but they would just, you breathe out, we fill up this big balloon, and then you'd run the balloon over to the analyzer and you would do things. And so it was like ride the bike at a certain speed for a little bit, collect some air, then crank it up, go a little bit faster, get a different balloon, collect some different air, right? And so on and so forth. And that was how we would measure oxygen use. And so they would put people, and we're going to do this, work when it's cold, work when it's hot. Work when it's hot and you get water or you don't get water, okay? There was no Gatorade, there was no Powerade in the 1920s, the 1930s and those things, but that is how we began as a field, okay? And we do a lot of the same things today. We're just a little bit more sophisticated about it. All right, so, and I call this contemporary exercise physiology, but in a lot of ways we've moved past some of this as well. So in the 50s until about the 70s, and there still is to this day, there's a very, very large European influence on a lot of the advances that we made in exercise physiology. And so if the early studies were on muscle metabolism and environmental stress, kind of the mid-years in the midst of all of this, there was a huge focus on skeletal muscle and trying to look inside of the skeletal muscle and understand sort of what does muscle look like, how does the way that it looks and the way that it functions change with increased activity, decreased activity, resistance training, et cetera, okay? And so a lot of this came out of Europe, it came out of these Scandinavian universities, and it was the advent of something called the muscle biopsy that really helped advance us here. What you can see on the right is a picture of a person having a muscle biopsy taken, okay? And what you see there is a thing, I could have brought one. I think we have one downstairs. We don't really do them anymore here. It's called a Bergstrom biopsy needle, developed by somebody named Bergstrom, who was Swedish, okay? And so what you do is, and we did this in the lab that I worked in when I was a PhD student, is normally you take them from the vastus lateralis, but you make a little small incision, about a centimeter long with a scalpel. You cut through the skin, you cut through the adipose tissue, you cut through the outer layer of fascia, okay? We call it the epimysium. We'll learn that probably on next week. Cut through the epimysium, you jam the needle's about as big around as a pencil. Stick the needle in, you apply some suction, you pull a piece of muscle in. The needle looks like a guillotine in some ways almost. It's not like a traditional hypodermic needle. I'll show you guys pictures next week a little bit better. You cut off a piece of muscle, you pull it out, it looks like the end of an eraser. We mount it, we would have to mount it on a popsicle stick. And you freeze it in liquid nitrogen, and then you take it and you would put it in the world's like best deli meat slicer. You cut these little tiny little thin sections on them, put them on slides, and you can look at them under a microscope, and muscle looks like this, okay? These are all individual muscle fibers, and then you can stain them for different things, and they will look differently depending upon their metabolic characteristics, what kind of fiber type they have, how much glycogen they have, and then you can do a whole bunch of this, okay? And so from this improvement in technique, this improvement in technology let us understand a little bit more physiology and some more anatomy, because now we can look inside the muscle. And it would be like, do this, take one, exercise, run for 2 hours, and then take another one, okay? Not always the best. You take them, you can put a little butterfly thing on, close up the hole, go for a run, and then take another biopsy out of the same hole. We've done that before, okay? And then we began to have these electron microscopes. Very, very, very powerful. You can get this all kind of detail that looks this way. And then also in the 70s, they began to develop techniques in biochemistry that we take for granted today. Okay. They don't have to put up a show of hands, right? But my guess is that most of you have probably taken an at-home rapid COVID test at some point. No, the technology of the COVID test began to be developed in the 60s and 70s, but you couldn't do it that easily. Okay. One of my grad students is doing research, and we do a DEXA scan on people. And so, ladies, if you want to be in our study, we have to give you a pregnancy test because there's radiation in the DEXA. And so we had one of our first participants yesterday, and in 30 seconds, there is a little strip to do a pregnancy test. Right? You pee in a cup, you put the strip in, and it drags to chromatography just like it does on the COVID test, and then it interacts. There are antibodies on there that interact with a particular hormone that's there. Okay, that technology was developed then, and we began to apply those techniques in biochemistry to try to understand, is muscle expressing a certain protein? Is it expressing a certain gene or a different gene product? And how does exercise or training or inactivity alter the expressions of those things? Okay. The technology that we use to get a COVID test is the same technology that we began to use to stain these fibers light and dark to tell us, is it expressing this form of myosin, of a myosin ATPase enzyme versus a different form? Okay. So these advances in technology let the field go forward and let us begin to learn more and more. So then in the 60s and on again into the 70s, okay, one of the things that drives research is money. Okay, it's money. But the big places that has the money is the US government. And so priority-wise, what the government or the sort of decides that we care about is going to be where the money goes. And so then the research tends to follow what you can get funded. One of the things that we cared about in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s was the Cold War, right? We must best Russia and show that capitalism is better than their version of communism by beating them to the moon, by winning more medals at the Olympics than them, okay? We won't get into, my wife, the history major, we won't get into sort of all of the other kind of ins and outs of all of that. But because of the space race, and because of the sort of let's beat Russia with medals at the Olympics, there was money to study the effects of microgravity or lack of gravity on things. And there was money to figure out who is the best athlete, how do we train them, right? And all of that. And so then that became a thing where exercise physiology became important and where we could focus. Okay. If you go to space, your muscles shrink, your eyeballs change shape, your cardiovascular system does weird, wild things because there's no gravity. Okay. So if we're going to send you to space and put you on the International Space Station and have you stay up there for 6 months or a year, we have to have a way to keep your muscles from shriveling up. We have to have a way for you to maintain cardiovascular health. Okay. And so it was originally about the moon, but even today, NASA is a big funder of it. So we paid people $1,000 when I was a PhD student to do a study that was in effect a on Earth based version of simulating being on the moon. Okay, my PhD advisor worked for NASA before he worked at the University of Georgia, and so he was very interested in countermeasures to all of this. Okay, you want to know what else happens when people have their muscles that will shrink? Bed rest. Okay, you're on bed rest, the muscles shrink. You have a spinal cord injury, you can't be physically active, your muscles shrink. Okay, you age, your muscles shrink. I can attest to that. Okay. So the things that began to be funded in the space race are directly applicable to everything. In a month of what we would call lower limb suspension, one shoe, giant like 8-inch platform, gave you some crutches, your other leg swung free. You bore no weight on your leg for a month, unless you were cheated. Okay? When you sat down, you propped your leg up. Got up in the middle of the night to go pee, you had to hop. Okay? A month of that. Quad, 12% smaller. Calf, 18% smaller. Okay? Within 2 weeks, it was down like 8%. Right? It does not take very long of not bearing weight. When there's no gravity, even though your muscles can contract, there's no load against them, they just shrink. Okay? Anybody ever been in a cast or your arm in a sling? Whichever muscle got casted in a shortened position, shrinks, goes right away. If you're on bed rest, the muscles will just go right away. Okay? So these kinds of things are really important. And then a lot of the stuff about performance, the things that probably interest you guys, that probably got you excited about exercise physiology. That's how I got it. Okay? Came out of, we must beat people. We must beat the Russians at the 72 Olympics. Was it the 68? 68. The 68 Olympics. You know what 68 Olympics were? Mexico City. You guys know what's unique about Mexico City? It's hot and really hot. Okay. Mexico City's elevation is higher than Denver. Okay. So we needed to understand Harvard Fatigue Lab, heat and altitude on performance. Okay. And we also need to figure out, well, why are some people better distance runners than others? Why are some people faster than others at sprinting? Okay. So there was money and a want to and a will to understand that. There's not much of that anymore. Okay. There's not a lot of money available for that anymore. All right, what do we do today? Well, I don't really know. It's kind of become a lot of different things. Exercise physiology today, with the advent of wearables, testing things, right? We can do fitness assessments and fitness tests quickly, easily, at a relatively low cost compared to previous things. Okay. Any of you that have an Apple Watch, if you go and you do some exercises, the Apple Watch will try to estimate a parameter called your VO2 max, which is your maximal ability to bring in oxygen, use it in your muscles, and it's one of our best ways to measure how aerobically or sort of endurance fit you are. Okay? It's within probably about 10%. Okay, but it knows how to do all of this. Okay? You can track your pace, you can estimate lactate thrust, we can do all of these different things quickly and easily. So we have all of this stuff. They make little things now that you can breathe into, and it will try to tell you of the stuff that you're doing right now, how much carbohydrate and how much fat are you burning to get that energy. Okay? It's kind of accurate. I don't really know what it gets you in any way, shape, or form, because all you gotta do is just eat something and it changes. Okay, in those particulars. But we can do all of this. There is a huge number of supplements, right, that are out there. And they all don't work. Right? Whatever you're taking, unless it's caffeine, it does not work. Those are those for today. Your pre-workout, and even the pre-workout that does anything is caffeine. Maybe there's another stimulant, right? It's in there. Right? And you take, you have to buy the good allergy stuff that you have to like sign and stuff at the pharmacy. They don't make you do that here in Oklahoma. In Mississippi, when I lived there, if you wanted to go buy like Claritin D or something, the stuff that has the T, you could only buy like one pack with a prescription like per month. Because you know why? Because you make meth with it. Right? There is essentially methamphetamine in sort of those kind of that sort of allergy medication. It's the same thing. The meth works. Okay, the meth works. The phenylephrine and stuff that's in there, it works. We won't get into an episode of Breaking Bad or anything to talk about how you make meth, but basically everything else, it doesn't. I mean, it's fine. It doesn't, but it really doesn't do anything. Okay. Do you need chocolate milk? I don't know. I mean, sure. I guess it's great. There's some protein in there. There's some carbs in there. If you worked out, you need some protein and carbs, and most of you are going to eat at some point anyway. There's nothing magic about all of that. Oh, I gotta have protein powder. Unless you're a vegetarian, like that's fine. Okay. The bros, and we should make this very clear. Ladies, y'all can be bros too. Okay. Right. Bro is a non-gendered term in those ways. Do you need protein powder? No, probably not. Right. Most of you just have really, if you take it, you just have really expensive urine. Okay. If you eat an American diet and you eat something that has protein in it, you just excrete all the extra. Okay. Creatine works a little bit, maybe not for the reason that you guys think, but creatine works. The creatine in your pre-workout is shit. It doesn't do anything, right? You don't need creatine today, it doesn't do anything for you. You need like 2 weeks of loading the creatine to get more creatine into your muscles so you can have more energy so you can do one more rep. That's how it works. But we test supplements because it's $1 billion business. It's $100 billion business, okay? Things look science-y in some ways. Well, it has this thing in it that seems like calcium would be good for muscle contractions, and it is, but you got plenty of calcium anyway. You don't need the damn supplement. Okay? If you're a 70-year-old woman and you have osteoporosis and you don't make any estrogen, so therefore your parathyroid hormone is really high, and you're leaching calcium out of your bones, maybe then it matters. You guys can. Okay? And this all the stuff I've got Lance on there, huge doper, great. And a shitty person, right? Just a huge, terrible, shitty person. Like I'm gonna sue and throw everybody else under the bus when you know you're a cheater. You know you were a cheater. I mean, they all are, right? We learn things about if I give you a shot of something called erythropoietin, EPO, right? You make more red blood cells, boom, you're a better endurance athlete like tomorrow. Okay? You want something that works, go donate blood today. Hang on, go then take it home, put it in your freezer. Okay? Get a pint of your blood, put it in your freezer. Then we're gonna wait 6 months, get your blood volume back up, and then we're gonna spin down your blood, just get the red blood cells, and we're gonna give them back to you. The blood volume increases, it makes your cardiac output go up. Your red blood cell count goes way up. Now you can carry more oxygen in your blood. 15% better VO2 max right now. That shit works. This other stuff, Gatorade, chocolate milk, pre-workout, beta-alanine, all of those other things, just a little bit. The caffeine works. Caffeine works, and then blood doping really works. Pardon? It's more than kind of illegal. It's very illegal. Yeah. Okay. We'll also see, right? Most people that you guys see, you think like, man, their muscles are so big. They're all on steroids. Everyone, they're all on steroids. Okay. Most of you, probably about a 15% increase in muscle mass. You're right in there. A few of you are going to be a little bit more than that, right? None of you are going to get that big. None of you are going to get that bulky or whatever. Maybe you want to. If you want, you're not going to get that big. Okay. The way to get big is to take steroids. It's not about how much protein you eat or I time the protein to all of this. We should ask, are we taking our cold shower still?
Oh God. I think she's hopped off that train once she realized how painful it was, but she's trying to get me on it now.
Okay.
So
tell her the cold shower is not cold enough. Okay. You need to go and like dump a bucket of ice water. It's not gonna do it. It's for fun. Dump a bucket of cold ice water on it. Okay. That stuff is not how you get there. Okay. As we'll see with most things. Okay. And we'll talk. That's why we spend a lot of time testing these things. It's good. They make a bunch of them. We get to test them, so we get to do research. That part's good. Most of them don't really work. Or if they do work, it's very, very marginal. If you're an Olympian, it probably matters. For the rest of us, it doesn't matter so much. Okay. The future of exercise physiology, there's a lot of stuff now about genetics. Okay. I'm trying to understand the genes that control why some people are better at things than others, genes that get turned on with physical activity and with exercise, and which ones don't in those ways. There's a big push in a bunch of all of those things. And then this idea of exercise is medicine, and I probably shouldn't have my little man on there about things, but the big thing that we know now, right, in all of this is why we had you guys take the health promotion classes, is all of the things that you can do in your life to make yourself healthier. physical activity and exercise is the single best thing. Okay? The single best thing. You don't ever want to become a type 2 diabetic? Be physically active. Right? You want to prevent heart attacks? Be physically active. You want to keep your blood pressure down? Be physically active. You guys got beat over the head with that, hopefully, in health and fitness, with this idea that exercise functions as medicine, because we have all of these chronic diseases, and that's why I've got my poor little guy on there. He's probably going to be a type 2 diabetic at like 14 or 15. Okay? Obesity in and of itself is not that bad. Right? It causes a lot of problems, but you can be obese, and if you're physically active, you're great. Okay? It's not being active. That's the thing. We were trying to understand the genetics and the responses and physiology that drives so much of all of that. Okay. That's sort of the future of these sorts of things. All right. We'll finish with a couple of concepts that I will hit over and over and over and over again in class. Okay. The first one of those is this idea of an acute response. Okay. Here's where we do fun things. Okay. Emily, stand up, please. Okay. Now, Emily, you want to stand up and sing a song for us? No? Are you not a singer? Okay. Emily, have you ever been on a really bad date? Yeah? Do you want to tell us about that? You don't have to, okay? Am I evoking an acute response out of Emily? And I've had Emily in class before on all of this, okay? Are you getting the acute response? Do you feel like anything physiologically has changed since I've stood you up in front of class and asked you to sing or talk about a bad date or something? Heart rate's higher. Acute response. Thank you. You can sit down, okay? Your heart rate is up. Her heart rate's up probably because she released epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's a stress response, okay? But she stood, her muscles had to work. Her breathing might have changed. The areas in her brain that are active were changing. That's an acute response, okay? Short term, right now. Same things happen. I could have said, Emily, get up and do jumping jacks or jog in place or sprint around the room or something, okay? Exercise evokes acute responses. Changes in a host of systems we'll talk about a bunch. Okay? What happens is exercise or other stressors throw your body out of homeostasis. Okay? It changes the status quo. And one of the things that our body is really good at is maintaining homeostasis. It does not like to be out of balance, out of homeostasis. Okay? This is real homeostasis. This is not I need to drink water that has like alkaline water because God forbid, right? You know, my water pH is off a little bit or some things like all of that. This is real, true sort of internal homeostasis. Okay? So you get thrown out, you get a response. It's in an effort to maintain or restore homeostasis. Then, because we evoked this response, if we do it today, and then tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, eventually what will happen is we will get what's called a chronic adaptation. I exercise over and over again. Chronic means over and over, longer period of time. Okay? What happens then is we begin to adapt. We begin to change either the anatomy or the physiology, or, that's going to go on. And what happens is it attempts to limit the disruption of homeostasis through a single bout of exercise. Okay? I lift and I lift and I lift for a few days. And now that 100 pounds that I was lifting is not quite as stressful to me as it used to be. Okay? And so I have had a chronic adaptation. And now to continue to adapt, now I don't need to lift 100, I got to lift 105. Or I got to lift 110. Okay? And so what we're going to talk a lot about in class is what are the acute responses? Okay, what are the chronic adaptations, and then what is the link between these two things? Because if you know where you want to get from a training perspective, and you know the changes that have to take place to get you to that place, then you can tailor a single bout of exercise or a single bout of physical activity to evoke the correct acute response to drive that adaptation. Okay? We need to change things today. If the increase in heart rate drives an adaptation in the cardiovascular system, then we need to figure out, well, what should we do today to make our heart rate? Okay? So there's some different things that go on. And this is why I will ask you guys weird questions like, if you watch a bunch of scary movies and you get scared and it stresses you and it makes your heart rate go up and your cardiac output go up, could you actually train yourself? If it looks like exercise, could you train your cardiovascular system by watching scary movies? Okay. Future test question. Okay. In the midst of all of that. So that's kind of where we are with these kinds of things. Okay. So you guys did all of this last week. Most of you turned that thing in. Okay. And we will talk a little bit about some of those things. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes until the quiz opens. Okay. We have about 10 minutes. So what I think we're going to try to do in that 10 minutes, despite my wanting to go ahead and move on to the next kind of things, we will save that for next week. We'll save sort of the neuromuscular, beginnings of neuromuscular anatomy for next week. Okay. So we've got 10. Anybody have a row science question where I can just tell you, no, that thing doesn't work? That you would like for me to sort of talk through. Otherwise, we can start doing a bit of an exercise about sort of some neuromuscular anatomy. Anybody have any row science? I apologize with the weather and things. I haven't had a chance to get through everybody's things to pick out a particularly great question. Anybody want to just open on the Wi-Fi, not on the Wi-Fi, but anybody want to open TikTok and find us something? So, yes, sir. What's your name?
Nicholas.
Nicholas, what you got, bud?
Selective androgen regulator modulator.
Selective androgen regulator modulators. SARMs. I have no idea what that is. I've never heard of those things.
It's like a baby steroid.
A baby steroid.
Yes.
So, where would one get a SARM?
You can order it on.
I can order it online without a prescription.
No.
If you can order it without a prescription, my guess is it doesn't work. Okay, so, but selective androgen receptor, so it's something that will supposedly interact with the testosterone or the insulin receptors or the IGF-1 or the growth hormone receptors.
Yeah, a whole
bunch of different types. Okay, without a show of hands, have you or anyone you know taken these things? Okay, do you all? I'm looking at the people that are putting their hands up. No one looks like someone that we might think was a steroid user. So my guess is you guys thought they worked. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I haven't done it, but I
But you know someone who had it. Okay. And did the person just get real big, real fast, like all of a sudden?
Yeah, pretty much.
Are we sure they weren't also just taking Winstrol, which is a horse steroid? Which is a very common sort of thing. I don't know. I don't know anything about these things. I need to go look this up now. So in theory, okay, in theory, if you could get something that would bind the testosterone receptor and activate it, then it would certainly promote increases in muscle mass, right? The limited evidence that we have on steroid use, it's unethical for us to test anabolic steroids, because we have a pretty good sense that if you overtake them, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Okay. So what we do know, a lot of it comes from what are called hypogonadal men. They're men that don't make enough testosterone. And we give them hormone replacements. Or we have men that are getting to be about my age. And you go down to the strip mall, right? And you get replacement testosterone in that way. In these kinds of things. Okay. And you see where we're going to start with, we start the hormone replacement, what begins to happen to those kinds of things. And if we add exercise on top of all of it, kind of what happens. Steroids work. They were really, like, you can take, and the ones that there was, they had a group where they gave them testosterone, they didn't even have them work out. Okay, take testosterone, just go sit on your couch, they get huge. Okay, and then the ones that take it and work out, everybody looks like the guy in the Matrix, huge, like just ginormous. Okay, in the midst of all of that. So in theory, then, if these androgen receptor modulator things would activate the receptors, then they're just a steroid. Like that's all that it is. Then they should be probably regulated. And I would advise people against taking those. The real question though is, for the folks that you guys did that took them, did they develop any of the sort of kind of secondary consequences that we see with steroids? What do you have? Ladies, any of y'all taken one or know a woman that has taken one? Do they develop male secondary sex characteristics or those kinds of things? That would be the other kind of key things. If you don't get that, then it's not really sort of promoting the testosterone in the same way that other things work. They make something interact with growth hormone receptors, guys. So there's SMARMs that do SARMs, I don't know whatever we're calling them. That interact with the growth hormone receptor, feet should grow. Ladies, just wait until y'all have a kid, your feet get bigger. New shoes, right? My wife embraced. So her shoe size went up half a shoe size. So we had to buy all new shoes. She loves shoes and she loves bags, like purses. Shoes and bags. We have a ton. I'm jealous of her shoe game. It's very good. On those kinds of things. Okay. But growth hormone promotes increases in like foot size, your shoes get bigger. And the way we know that all the baseball players back in the day or even now are taking growth hormones to your forehead gets bigger, your skull increases, your hat size gets bigger. Without seeing some of those things, you may not be getting kind of this really strong binding there. So I don't know much about those. But I mean, in theory, it could work. But my guess is it probably, if you can buy it like on Amazon or just online, it probably doesn't. Okay. Most things, when you're like, dude, I took it and I got big. One, you probably weren't very trained to start with, right? People that are untrained will see larger gains initially. And two, what it does, it's a placebo effect where it motivates people to go and exercise. Because I'm taking this, now I'm going to go work hard. And it's really just the working hard that promotes it. Okay? But in some instances, some of those things might work. It seems too good to be true, it's probably not true. That's all that I will say. But I've heard that if you go to Steel and you want some Winstraw, there's probably some people that could hook you up with some Winstraw. Don't reach into the garbage too much there, you might get stabbed by it. One of my grad students goes, he might on there, but he works out at Steel. He tells some stories. What else? We got like just a couple of minutes.
We're training legs every day, promote overall mass increases.
No. Training, you just said legs, just legs.
Yeah, like just getting a leg lower body exercise.
Whole body maybe, but if you train your legs, guess what gets bigger?
Your
Legs. Guess what gets stronger?
legs.
Your legs. All that specificity, right? Now, should you train every day? Probably not. Okay. Probably need some rest days in there, but if you do whole body stuff, yeah, you can promote overall increases in lean body. And other things, your legs are much larger muscles than the upper body. And so if you want to get larger changes in lean muscle mass, legs need to be a part of all of that, right? Bros don't squat, bros don't power clean. Bros are very top heavy, right? Here, right, it's Wednesday, what's today? Probably shoulders and thighs, something like that. Like back and thighs today, yesterday was shoulders. Tomorrow will be second chest day, right? Right, I mean, Monday is bench press day, right? Monday is bench day. So if you ever want on a Monday, if you ever want to squat, go squat on a Monday. Nobody in squat. Right? Nobody in squat. Right? Yeah. We'll get this out of the way now before we do body comp later on. Most of you aren't going to gain that much muscle mass. You can gain some. Most of you are not. If if you really want to lose weight or you want to look leaner, because it's January, right? We need to start now. Spring break. Start now. Okay, we can't be like, oh, it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks out. Start doing things. No, it's not gonna work. Start now. The best thing to do is just stop going to Chick-fil-A. As I now think about Chick-fil-A.
He's like, I just put myself
Right?
in that trap.
If you want to change body composition, you need to exercise, but you also probably need to reduce caloric intake in some ways. And most of us, the online things that say like how many calories you need are wild overestimates. Okay, depending upon what you're doing. Right. So, ladies, most of y'all probably need, if you just sat around in bed all day and did nothing, which sounds awesome. Depending upon how much you weigh, most of y'all on average are going to need somewhere between maybe 800 and 1200 calories a day. You just sat there and didn't do anything, right? Strawberry Chick-fil-A milkshake with whipped cream, it's like 900 calories by itself. Okay? I'm serious. You go, you're done. You had that, then a chicken sandwich, you got 2 days worth of calories. Okay, guys, 15 to 2,000, maybe depending upon like how big you are. Right? We eat that just like that. That's why we're obese as a society. Is that it's easy for us to have these very palatable foods that are very calorically dense in that way. So anyway, okay. The quiz should open, I think, at 9:05. You can use your notes, you can use your things for today. Anybody know, is it open? What?
Yeah, it says do at 9:05.
It should be
Oh,
due
but
at
that's tomorrow though, there. It's 24.
Oh,
Oh, it's not.